The gameplay and story announcement trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree is finally among us. And like everyone else, I'm super hyped for the June release date, and my mind is running wild with thoughts, speculations, and lore implications. Let's get into it. The first thing we see as we start the trailer is the back of someone's feet and a cloak that reminds me of Melina, though it could just be a nameless tarnish being used to introduce the area that players will use to access the DLC, which is Miquella's cocoon, at least according to the interview Miyazaki did with IGN as the trailer released. Immediately, we get the sense that Miquella is someone who should be feared, with a contradictory line about his power.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
Next, we have a couple of beautiful shots of the landscape as the character rides through, and we rest on this shot of the Erdtree. Now, up until this trailer, and solely based off the original image that was teased 2 years ago, I assumed that the tree had burned down and is now a burnt husk. But after seeing it in the trailer, with more of an idea of what area we're in, I'm not too sure that that's the case. According to the interview with Miyazaki, the setting of Shadow of the Erdtree is a brand new land. It's a brand new map separate from the lands between. It is a land that is overshadowed by the particular shadow of the Erdtree, as opposed to the Erdtree and the lands between. And it takes place, again, on an entirely separate, physically separate map, so it will involve a warp of sorts to get there. So it seems to me that this is the literal shadow of the Erdtree, or an alternate version of the Erdtree that is dark or cased in shadow. In the base game, the Erdtree seemed to represent life and reincarnation, and with Marika's hard stance against destined death and her locking away the rune of death, what if this version of the Erdtree represents the darker side of life? Death, and what comes from it. The other reason I'm not too sure that the DLC takes place after the main campaign of Elden Ring is that From Software usually doesn't pick an ending they consider canon, and usually their DLC happens either in a time before the events of the main game, like with the Artorias of the Abyss DLC for the first Dark Souls, or in an area outside of time, like with the Old Hunters DLC for Bloodborne. Though, I could be wrong. I haven't played Dark Souls 2 or 3 yet, and I've tried to keep my blockers on as much as possible for those games. Also, I'll add, the more I look at the Erdtree, it doesn't really look like it's on fire or was. I know that there are these streams of gold leaking from the tree, but it looks more like sap than embers burning the tree from within. Though I could be completely wrong here. Next, we see a montage of new characters that are for sure new NPCs and potentially new enemies as well as allies. What is interesting to me is that in his interview, Miyazaki says, and Miquella has, as we said, traveled to the Land of Shadows, but essentially the player will be following in those footsteps in the same way that they followed the blessings from the grace. And of course, the player is not the only one who's curious about Miquella. There are several characters in the world and NPCs who have been following Miquella as well, and the player will encounter them on their journey in the lands between, and they will make new friends and enemies, we hope. So, not only are we following in Miquella's footstep and traveling to the Land of Shadow, but there are others here that are doing the same thing, both friend and enemy alike. I'm not going to guess who's going to be an enemy and who will be a friend, except for this guy. He seems nice, so friend. And her, she looks mean, so enemy. We get more epic landscape shots and some more detail shots with this portrait standing out to me, and it kind of looks like Fia, which is probably not right, and she may be a new character, but for the sake of speculation, what if this is the land that she came from before we meet her in the Round Table Hold? With the man in the painting looking more like her potential father, or maybe a noble that she was the deathbed companion for. Maybe not so much the last one, since otherwise why would there be a painting of her with him? The other speculation that occurred to me, that as I watched some other videos on YouTube, is that could be Marika before she became a goddess, which actually makes a lot more sense considering that if you go to the website, it states, Fall from Grace, the Land of Shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot, a land purged in an unsung battle set ablaze by Mesmer's flame. It was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden. And now Miquella awaits the return of his promised lord. So not only is this the place where Miquella went off to when he put himself into the cocoon and is presumably here trying to find a cure for his curse of youth, it also states that this is where Queen Marika first set foot, which is interesting and could mean that before she even made it to the lands between that we know, she was first in this land and presumably did something to keep it a secret or a land that is hard to reach, which kind of makes me feel more like this is going to be a land of death, since she doesn't like death and tried to lock death away from her world entirely so her children would never get hurt. But we'll see. Next, we see some footage of some new enemies, like this large burning golem and these man-eating worm-looking things. And then there's this guy who for sure is a new boss fight, but looks so cool, and I wonder who this is. Now, if this is a land of death or the dark side of the Erdtree, is there a chance that this could be some form of Godwyn the Golden? Probably not. I have no real reason for thinking this other than I really want to see some form of Godwyn the Golden that doesn't look like a deflated octopus. And it also seems to be spewing deathbite from its mouth, which means that it could be some form of a being that lives in death. And Godwyn was the first death of a demigod. Also, the enemy wields lightning, which looks just like the lightning spear spell that Godwyn used to defeat the dragons and protect Leyndell, with its item description reading, "Long ago, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortisax and befriended his fallen foe, an event that gave rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital." So at the very least, it could be someone connected to that dragon cult, but if it's Godwyn the Golden, that would be pretty interesting. And the last thing I'll say that makes me think that this is Godwyn is that Godwyn is the son of Marika and Godfrey. And Godfrey's identifying symbol is the lion, because of Sarash, his lion regent. And the main face of this enemy is a lion. A reach for sure, but just thought I'd mention it. Next is probably the biggest part of this reveal trailer. This new character is known as Mesmer the Impaler. When I first saw him, I thought he was Mikola because we first see his arm similar to Mikola's arm hanging out of the cocoon, and he has long, lanky arms similar to Mikola's. But what I can say for sure is that Mesmer is the child of Marika, just based off of his lines here.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
But he also has that signature red hair that most of the children of Radagon have. So my guess is that he might be a secret child of Marika and Radahn, but the timing of his birth and their marriage gets confusing, especially when you take into account that Radagon and Marika are one and the same. He also controls snakes and fire, similar to Rykard, so I'm curious to see if one of the reasons maybe he is stuck in this land, if he is at all, is because of him falling into the traps of blasphemy like Rykard did. Or maybe he's the one that potentially corrupted Rykard with his snakes, I'm not sure, because he is controlling snakes. He also sits on a throne that looks identical to the thrones at the foot of the Erdtree. Whether this means that his goal is to leave the land of shadows and take the throne, or simply take the throne for himself and become the next Elden Lord, or simply that he is on the level of the other Empyreans. According to the interview Miyazaki did, it means the latter, but we'll see. And finally, we see a mysterious shot of someone with flowing golden hair. Presumably this is Mikola, and it looks like the same person who was riding Torrent in the first teaser image we ever got for this DLC. Speculatively, what if it's a reincarnation of Marika, or a form of her from when she first stepped foot in the Land of Shadow? I don't think that's the case at all, but it does bring up one thing that I find interesting. It's that Mikola is the only one of Marika and Radagon's children that looks more like her than him. He is pretty much the only one that doesn't have some form of red hair. Even Melina, who doesn't have vibrant red hair, has a pinkish hair color. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't take a second to talk about the things in this trailer that are 100% Berserk references, with the first one that I noticed was the fiery, I guess it's a golem or the Wicker Man, that's burning and has the bodies of his enemies burning within him. It looks really similar to the Wicker Man golem that Guts encountered when they first got to the Elf Island they were traveling to in the manga. The other one that I didn't notice until I saw it online was that Mesmer's design in face and even helmet and red hair color looks a lot like Grunbeld from Berserk, and I definitely see that one. That looks pretty on point to me. The other thing that I did notice that always kind of struck me was how they described Mikola, and how Mikola, if this is Mikola, at the end of the trailer, looks a lot like Griffith from Berserk, with his very effeminate looks and long, beautiful flowing hair, and kind of like his grand ideology. The other thing that I just saw online that I want to mention that it didn't hit me until I saw it and it looks really spot on is that Mikola's cocoon and his arm sticking out of it looks a lot like the rebirth of Griffith by the God Hand. So it's just cool to see all these crazy Berserk references in all of Miyazaki's games, but of course it's even more on the nose with this DLC. That was my speculation and thoughts on the story trailer and story and lore implications for Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. I am extremely excited for this game. I can't wait for it to come out. I talk about it all the time. I just can't wait to play more Elden Ring. It's going to be amazing. Let me know what you all think in the comments below, and thanks for watching.